we're going to introduce one more beer tonight. But I do want to touch on that. So 1 second. Our last beer for the night is going to be the Great Lakes Christmas Ale. This is in Cleveland, by the way. I don't know if you know this, Brian, but in Cleveland, this is one of the most famous Christmas ales in the country in Cleveland. Yeah. So, yeah. They sell this every year, and it is the top-selling Christmas ale inside all of Ohio. Yep. So, go ahead, Mike.
Do not open till Christmas. Whoever coined that phrase obviously hasn't tasted Christmas ales, fresh honey, cinnamon, and ginger flavors. A Yuletide's worth of holiday spices and sweet honey to keep you wassailing all season long. It's got an ABV of 7.5% and an IBU of 30.
And once again, it's got that nice dark nutmeg type look to it. It's clear though. I can see Mike through it. So,
your beer goggles,
right?
This is probably my favorite Christmas ale right here.
This is really good. I would say.
My Lord.
If we were to compare the two, I don't know if the bourbon was still, but I had a hard time differentiating. Like the last one had kind of a bourbon-esque. This is way more festive.
Okay.
The spices are very apparent.
Mm. Yeah. It actually has a stronger nutmeg flavor than the previous one. I think.
Feels a bit fuller.
Yeah.
I feel wassailing.
I'm surprised the IBU is higher because it's not very bitter.
It's not at all. If you go back to Revelation, it does say that there are 12 pillars, right? And all of Revelation dictates 12 pillars once in heaven, which means that the 12 apostles were the final authority.
Mm.
Good point.
As they are the 12 pillars in heaven. Because the 12 pillars are named after them.
12 gates.
Right.
12 angels. 12 foundations. Oh, that's what you're talking about, the 12 foundations.
Right.
On them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. I didn't know that word foundation could be pillar. That's interesting. That makes sense.
Interesting,
cool.
isn't it? Yeah.
But and again, Ephesians 2, right? I mean, this is just so clear to me. Ephesians 2, 17 to the end, it talks about how, well, by the way, this is another one of those passages of the Hebrew roots movements. It's just, I quoted this and they just tried to spin the words and twist. It was just so funny because it's so clear that, that Ephesians 2:15 says, Christ broke down the dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile, which is, by the way, all those dietary laws you're promoting,
right?
Separates Jews from Gentiles, right? And I'm like, and it says Jesus broke down the dividing wall of hostility in his flesh on the cross by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two. So he's saying it right there that all the ordinances, all the commandments are abolished. They're abolished because Jew and Gentile are now one in Christ. Yet the whole point of all the separation laws, separate lint or linen and cotton and all this kind of stuff, and don't eat fish and shellfish and blah, blah, blah. It's all about separating Jew from Gentile. So if that's no longer in effect, you can't be enforcing those laws. They make no sense. Anyway, I'm off. I got
which
off
you even go from an biblical historical point would be the vision that Peter had.
Yeah.
So where the things came down and the things that were forbidden all of a sudden now are acceptable.
Now they would say, oh, that's just symbolic. That's not actually, that was symbolic about accepting Gentiles who eat that food. To which I say, yeah, it is, but it's a symbol that is still violating the law of God, right? That's the whole point. it's still a symbol that violates the law of God, because you weren't supposed to accept Gentiles who ate that stuff,
Right.
Anyway, so back to what we're saying though. So it says, you're no longer strangers and aliens, but fellow citizens of God, the household of God, which is reference to the temple, built on that word again that you said, the foundation of the apostles. That's powerful. The apostles are the foundation of the temple of God, and the prophets, Christ Jesus being the cornerstone. The cornerstone of the temple was the measuring. How do we put it? It was the stone upon which the entire temple was based. Right.
It was the plumb line.
The perfect right corners, the measurements, and everything. Right. And so if the cornerstone is Jesus, then obviously the cornerstone is spiritual. That means the building built upon that is spiritual, folks.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you are built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. That phrase, into a dwelling place by God for God by the Spirit, that's what all the old covenant prophets kept saying. When I return in Messiah, I will dwell in my people. And they're saying this is fulfilled right here and there. Yeah. And so my point was about that, the beauty and the power of this new holy spiritual temple. The temple has been rebuilt, folks. It actually already has. It's a spiritual one, and we are its bricks. And I'm not just saying this symbolically as if like, how can we avoid the historical reality? No, what I'm saying is the apostles themselves said, this is the fulfillment right here. The spiritual temple is the fulfillment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just like Pink Floyd said, we're all bricks in the wall.
Yeah, different kind of wall.
The true last great prophet.
To touch on a few other things, I'm kind of interested. So your archangels, did you base your archangels off of people you know? Because they have very active personalities.
Yes, you make a good point. And that was another risky thing that I did because, again, we have these, and I had them too, false assumptions about, well, angels are going to be these, holy, good, la-di-da, like no character, no personality, right? And I thought about this and I thought, you know what? No, I mean, they don't have to be sinners to have a personality, right?
Right.
So why can't one of them be a jokester? Why can't one of them, be sarcastic or whatever, And I just started realizing, and sometimes the people who don't like it, that's what they say. It's like, no, you make the angels seem like they're just a bunch of jerks and just a bunch of humans. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. They're created beings. They have flesh.
Yep.
It's not earthly flesh. It's heavenly flesh, but it is flesh. And they have personalities. Why wouldn't they have individual personalities? Why wouldn't they be like us, but maybe without the sin, right?
Right.
And so, so that's what I did. So I took Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, and Raphael. Those are the four that have been the only two in the Bible that are noted are Gabriel and Michael. But in extra biblical books, we get the names of 7 actually other archangels. There's also one called Sarakel and Remiel, and another one. And I got that from the book of First Enoch and from some other Jewish sources, that do have these other names.
Tobit has Raphael.
So they're legends and stuff. And so what? Who knows? But but so I thought, if we're going to have this band of archangels with each other for eternity, and they're individuals, they're human, they're not human, they're individuals and they have personalities. So I wanted to make them that way. So, I made Michael the big brother who's responsible and, sometimes a little stuffy. And then I have Gabriel and Uriel have this, eternity long sort of competition between each other. And I made Uriel be a small, for some reason, God made him small. So they tease him about that, but he ends up being one of the better fighters. He compensates for it. He's got, he's the better swordsman. And he's real witty. He uses his humor, kind of like Chandler from Friends, the TV show. He uses his humor to tease Gabriel, and so they tease each other back and forth, right? And it's just a fun thing because my whole thing is like holiness, and this is what I try to do in my books and my novels. We have this false notion that like holiness is boringness,
Yeah.
If you're holy, you will not not make jokes because you're so tuned into God. Basically, it's the false picture of mysticism. It's like it's what we think mystics are. But I think Jesus
Gnostic.
joked around, and why not? I think a holy person would have fun. And so I decided to do that. I would have my angels poke around and have fun, and they're able to make jokes about things, and I just felt that made it more. I was going to say human, but more realistic, And so this whole thing of holiness, and that's why I even have Jesus. I think I even have Jesus in my book, Jesus Triumphant. He cracks a couple jokes.
He does.
Here and there.
He does.
Yeah. Because that's what I believe. I believe that God loves laughter, right? God loves beauty. He loves art and creativity. These are things that seem like a waste of time to us, right?
Right.
And so I also think in personality types, God creates us with certain personality types, right? So why can't we celebrate that? And why can't we celebrate that in angels as well?
But he even said it in his word, even Proverbs, talked about laughter is good medicine.
Yeah.
He talks about and how David danced and creativity and things with that. So that if we didn't have those things, life would be, like you say, boring and stiff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But I gotta admit, even myself, when I was first starting to write these angels, and teasing each other and stuff, it kind of felt awkward to me because I'm like, it felt what's the word? Where you're not taking something seriously enough or something,
Right.
But because I felt like I had that same prejudice built into me that said, if you're going to be angels, they're just going to be perfect and they're just boring, like without personality and just perfect with beautiful hair and whatever, and I'm like, no, and they're all tall and handsome. It's like, no, why can't one of them be small,
Well, you've seen Dogma, right?
What?
You've seen Dogma, right, with Kevin Smith? The movie.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
Years ago.
Yeah. That's I think one of the most hilarious things he says in there is, well, yeah, God has a sense of humor. Haven't you seen your faces during coitus?
A little risque humor, but yeah, absolutely.
Right.
That's another thing I did, and I knew it would be shocking to some Christian readers, but I'm like, you need to be shocked because if you're offended by this, you have an unbiblical view. So in the book on Abraham Allegiant, of course, Abraham and Sarah,
right,
very famous, right, in our history. But also, I depicted them as, and they were childless, right?
Yeah.
And my wife and I are childless, actually. So I drew from a lot of what kind of a relationship do you have when you can't have children? It's a much more closer, intimate one because all you've got is each other, right?
Yeah.
And but it's also a very affectionate and loving one, right? And so I actually, I have a scene. It's not graphic, but I do have a scene where, Abraham and Sarah are having sex and God shows up,
I remember. That's
he
great.
interrupts them. He interrupts
I remember.
them,
He does.
He
does.
And they hold the cover and goes, what do you think? I haven't seen you?
Right.
But I also think that that's beautiful because it's like, of course when you're having married sex, you are doing it in God's eyes and it's beautiful to God and he likes it. And he goes, oh, don't worry, finish up. I created sex or something like that. I can't remember what I said, but
catch it when you're done.
I need more bourbon.
But don't worry, Christians. I'm not explicit. I don't describe any details. It's just sort of I paint a picture and then I keep moving.
No. It was a funny scene. I remember as I was reading it, I physically started laughing because it was a very funny scene.
Just don't expect it,
Yeah,
but why would God sees you all the time? So
It's a valid point. Yeah, very valid.
No, I thought it was hilarious. I started busting up laughing. I pulled over.
Well, I was laughing when I was writing it, dude. I'm telling you, yeah.
Well, it is a spiritual moment when you think about it,
Absolutely. In fact, I believe literally, there's lots of passages that talk about that. It likens the love of Christ for his church in those terms as a love of a husband and wife, right? And so it is very intimately connected to the love of God. Is our love and union in marriage is a reflection of a spiritual union with God, and that's why I used to be really against the mystics for their erotic imagery, but I have a little bit more acceptance and understanding of them now, because I realize, it wasn't some sick, twisted thing. It really is a sort of a reflection. Erotic goodness can be a very powerful metaphor for our love and unity with God.
Yeah, he made it, right? Actually, I was listening to there's a podcast by Ancient Faith Radio from Elder Trapan, and it was beautiful. There was one I was listening to this morning on sexuality, and he states, sexuality was created by God. It's a beautiful art form to be performed between a man and a wife, and it's symbolic of God's interaction with humanity, and it's beauty.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful.
And that's, by the way, that's another one of my goals throughout my whole Chronicles of the Nephilim series, and in Apocalypse as well, is I wanted to literally show good, true married love in a godly context, rather than like shunning it or ignoring it because that's dirty, or because we shouldn't have things like that in our stories as Christians. It's like, no, if it's good and God created it, then we must celebrate it appropriately, just like the Song of Solomon.
Right.
If anyone's ever studied that, that's a very erotic piece of literature, right?
It really is.
So my goal was to make marriage beautiful and marriage sexuality beautiful, and I contrasted it with the godless sexuality, which is, grotesque and horrible. And I remember Abraham Allegiant was very strong. I dealt with the sexuality of Nimrod, what was it? Yeah, it was Nimrod of Babel, right, in that time period. And I contrasted his sexuality with Abraham and Sarah's. And so I even, I described the honeymoon night of Abraham and Sarah, but again, I believe I did so as tastefully as I could, and I didn't dwell on details.
Yeah.
I tried to show this is beautiful. Marriage sexuality is beautiful, so let's celebrate it appropriately.
Yeah.
And as Christians, I think that's important that we do that and enforce that.
Yeah.
And my goal. So and I do think people, when they read it, they get that impression. It's like, no, I'm not exploiting it. I'm not writing sexual. I'm showing this is the beauty of marriage, of what sexuality can be, and here's what it is in contrast with the world and how ugly. And I make the sexuality of the world ugly.
I thought you did
not erotic.
I thought you did a great job, because you contrasted the beauty of two people believing in the ultimate authority of the Godhead, and the love they had for each other, contrasting with the Nephilim, and they're literally raping of each other, So it's like, I thought
the
it was
Watchers,
right, yeah. So I thought it was,
because this brings us back to Genesis 6, which is interesting because Genesis 6 is where the Nephilim first show up, and it's where this notion of the sons of God having sex with women, and if you read that, it's like, this is before the flood. This is where a lot of the violence came from. It says, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, Genesis 6, verse 1, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Yeah. And then, that phrase, they took as their wives, it sounds a lot tamer than it is in the Hebrew. That phrase, they took, is a forceful language. So it's probably raping and forcing them. Yeah. And so it's not like, they married people. It's like, no, they raped and forced women to be their sexual conquests, right? Right. So to me, that's the whole context of the text, precisely, is that this is what these fallen sons of God, these watchers do. They engage they break the earthly and heavenly divide. That's the whole point. When God created when God created in Genesis, why does he always talk about separating the land from the sea, separating man from woman, separating right? It's separation is the concept is what holiness is based on, and that's why it's rooted in the Torah, which has something to do with separation, right? But one of those separations is the separation of the heavenly and the earthly, and so one of the implied separations here is that the angelic divine world must not have sexual interaction, intimate interaction with the human world. Now, it doesn't say that explicitly, but I think that that's what is being implied. There's a violation of that separation of heavenly earthly divide.
But it is a covenant.
No.
Is it a covenant?
The covenant between a relationship between a man and a woman is a covenant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Cumby.
Well, I want to ask you about you have a lot of experience in Hollywood and writing in Hollywood. In lieu of everything that's going on in terms of sexuality in Hollywood these days with all these producers and actors being taken down one by one, how far have we pushed that envelope here in America? And is there any relation to this? Could you see any relations to the fallen ones taking women as their own and forcing them versus what we do in Hollywood and exploiting that in movies to infiltrate all of America?
That's good.
Yeah.
Especially with all the Weinstein stuff.
I mean, what's
going
kind of your
on
viewpoint on that and what's happening with Hollywood? And
from my perspective, it's sort of like, well, you guys, when you have an entire system that's based on mocking and attacking Christianity, right? The Handmaid's Tale, right?
I haven't seen
Christians
it yet.
are evil. Christians are leches. Christians are murderers. And Christianity is an oppressive, patriarchal, fascist regime, right? And you're always showing Christian relationships and families as being dysfunctional and destructive, right? Yeah. And you mock Christian morality of like being a virgin before you're married, And when you do this and you mock morality and you morality is relative, and how dare you impose your morality on others, right? When you enforce this whole system that is anti-Christ and anti-biblical and mocking morality and sexual morality and saying we should be free to have sex with whoever we want, whoever we love, right? Why is it a surprise that this is how this is how men end up acting? And by the way, also that women can be just like men, and we should be able to just be just as promiscuous, which I believe neither should be, but nevertheless,
right.
The male nature is definitely male nature is different than female nature. But when you're trying to destroy the differences between male and female, you're making everything become the same. This is what you get. Yeah. This is what the male monster becomes, and you created it. It's like, what are you talking about? You said for them to go and be sexual, and you laughed at all the years, all of them covered up. It's the real atrocity, the real shock should not be that these men did it. It's that all the women enabled them and kept it hidden. Not the women who got attacked. I'm saying the women in power, along with the men in power. Everyone, even those who weren't doing it, were part of covering up and accepting it. Well, of course you can, because they don't believe that morality is a big issue. Now all of a sudden it becomes a big issue. Sexual morality is all of an issue. Only because it's rooted in a leftist, feminist hate theory that is not going to end good. It's a witch hunt. They're getting some real witches.
I agree.
But there's going to be you see already what's happening, right? There's no evidence is needed, no evidence on 20 years ago, and all of a sudden they're guilty. Well, I'm sorry, they probably are. They probably are. I don't doubt that a lot of what the women are saying is true. But if you live in a society where you jettison due process and no longer are you innocent until proven guilty, you're creating a Frankenstein monster that's far worse than the injustice you're trying to address. You just don't realize it until it starts to happen to you. Right. So, and now we've got a lot of men who are claiming that they're lying. And I think one example to me was Jeremy Piven. I think he took a lie detector test. I don't know if he's innocent or not, but he took a lie detector test and passed it. And he says, "I want these women to take a lie detector test." That's smart. To me, that's fair. Because if you're gonna just tell the world, well, this guy raped me or this guy forced me to whatever, it's like, and you think that makes you just because you say it, it's true. That's
Right.
absurd.
Right.
And so these women have to be accountable for what they're saying. And
Right.
so do the men who are doing it. And I can't deny that I'm happy to see a lot of these bastards go down, because it really is rampant, and it really is as bad as you think it is. It's worse, actually.
Sure.
I mean, we've got pedophilia rings going on in the homosexual side of Hollywood, right? So this stuff is going on. It really is going on. But as always, this gets back to vigilantism. It's like, yeah, we want to see this justice. It's good to see people get the comeuppance, but vigilantism does end up in innocent people being destroyed and murdered and killed.
Yeah.
And so you've got to do things through due process. That's why we're a nation of laws. And I think that's the scariest thing of all, is we are now, as a culture, we're jettisoning the rule of law and replacing it with the rule of emotion and leftist ideology, which is fascism. And this is not going to end well for us.
Yeah.
And so it's the beginning. It's like, wow, nice to see him fall. But now it's like, no, this is fascism. This is going to get worse.
Right.
And I don't know what.
Yeah, I hate to say this, but I think this is actually a good part of evolution inside the human species in our society, because if you look at it, right, if you look at it, the fact that we're moving towards something that is culturally, let's say, the next stage, where everybody has more respect for each other and nobody's forcing themselves on each other, it's almost, I think it's better. I mean, you can't tell me that a few of these people, and I won't name a lot of names, but there's definitely a few people that have been found guilty in all of this debacle.
I agree.
You know?
And look, as a Christian, I agree with, I agree in principle that women should not be abused. But the problem is it's now bleeding over to, getting a picture taken with someone and squeezing them is sexual harassment. That's making crimes out of what is vulgar and boorish behavior and inappropriate. But you can't make crimes out of this, because if you do, you're criminal. And here's what I think is the goal. So it's one of those things where there, like I said, a witch hunt catches some real witches, but at the price of what?
I hear you.
Destroying hundreds of non-witches.
I hear you.
And the problem is that they're driven not by appropriate sexual interaction like Christians say. You have to remember, this is a culture, Hollywood culture hates God, has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
What it has to do with is their attempt to emasculate, destroy masculinity.
Yeah.
And the traditional forms of masculinity. To which I say, I certainly agree that the abuse of male power is wrong, but that doesn't make all male power wrong.
Right.
It means just because you have power, or just because you're a man and you act in certain ways, you have to, like I have to, restrain myself. But that doesn't mean I'm what I am as a man, and my masculinity is itself inherent. This is where you get the term toxic masculinity. They're trying to say all masculinity is wrong and toxic. They're trying to neuterize male and destroy them. And that's where I think the third wave feminism has really infected the left, and Hollywood is all the left, and that's what they all are. So that's where I see it. There's some good that's coming out of it, of course. Just like the Puritan. It's funny that now the Hollywood left are the Puritans, right? They always used to mock, oh, you puritanical Christians, you evangelical puritanical Christians. They're the Puritans now, because they're like saying, you can't even hug a woman. Guys are losing their jobs because they're huggers.
Right.
I'm like, really? Who's the Puritan now?
Right.
It's absurd. So
I
it's
agree.
dangerous. It's going too far is the problem.
I agree.
It is going. Yeah, and it doesn't always go too far before there's a balance.
Well, how far were we the other way?
Yeah.
I mean, how far, how extreme were we already to begin
I mean,
with?
if you look at it, I mean, and I could be wrong, but if you look at it historically, I think that your John Waynes were very acceptable in society because they were masculine. They weren't afraid to throw a guy across the table to relate to an interaction he had with the Rat Pack, right?
Right. But here's the difference: is that old masculinity, which I actually, I agree. I think John Wayne's a great example for what a man should be. But they had a code of chivalry.
Yeah.
And chivalry was you protect the women, you don't treat them that way, right?
Exactly.
So what the men are doing is not really traditional male masculinity.
Right.
Because chivalry is what feminism hates too. How dare you open a door for me? How dare you treat me as if I'm frail? But see, this is what's also being rejected, which is why I say, yes, there's some good coming out of it. Absolutely, I agree. But what I think is it's very important for us to understand, or it's very important for us to highly value the reasons for certain social moral changes. Those are just as important as what's happening. So in other words, like what I'm saying is the reasons why they're doing this is ultimately not good, even though on the surface right now it appears like, well, they're pointing out some real true things, right? They're pointing out sexual predators. Yeah, that's good. But what they're really doing is they're really trying to destroy true masculinity, trying to destroy, they're hating God. You know what I'm saying? So because they're motivated by an anti-biblical, anti-Christ motive, whatever good that's happening on the surface now is going to be gone, because what you end up, your end will be what your premise is. And what I'm arguing is that their premise is not, we must treat women respectfully.
Yeah.
I don't think it is. They'll say that, but we should treat women respectively according to our leftist feminist ideology, which I do not agree with. And that ideology is ultimately the enemy of Christianity. Yeah. So they're trying to destroy Christianity, but they're starting out on the surface with things that we would agree with, right? Of course we agree with this.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
It's complex. It's not a simple issue.
Yeah. No, it's not at all. Yeah. And a lot of the executives, top executives, have huge political ties and are huge political donors. So there's always a political angle.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
it's dark, man.
It's
very dark.
Yeah, there's not just one motive.
But it's the look, you guys. This is the argument of Daredevil. Did you see the Daredevil series?
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the Punisher. But the idea is, is it right for, how far do we work outside the law? Mm-hmm. Do the ends justify the means?
Right.
And if the ends justify the means, you'll start out doing good, but what you'll end up doing is bad.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just as important why you're changing social mores as it is the change itself. And that's where I'm saying the reason why they're doing this is not for it's not for ultimately, it's a mixed motives. There is some good reason behind it, but there's a lot of very political intent behind what they're doing that I think is going to be bad in the long run. So I don't support, for instance, I don't support all of them just because you make a claim, therefore fire the guy. It's like, I don't think that that's necessarily appropriate unless there's good, strong evidence and argument for it, but sometimes it's just literally just some woman saying this. Well, how do you know it's even true at all?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, because I tweeted it.
Yeah. Now the upside though is all these guys, they've been getting away with it for decades, literally decades. So there is the tendency to have multiple examples.
Oh yeah,
multiple testimonies building. I think it does tend to be more strong evidence.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's to get us back on track. In your stories, I love how they kind of all come out of the gigantomachy.
Yeah, one of the things I try to do is I try to integrate the biblical stuff with, some Jewish legends as well as pagan mythology. And what I mean by that is not because I think that it's all myth and, it's all made up, but rather because I think that there are real world explanations for why there are ancient myths. And I think that there's connections to the Bible. So, for example, you said the gigantomachy. There's two things in Greek religion, the gigantomachy and the titanomachy. Gigantomachy.
Yeah.
And I kind of forgot some of the details of it, so that's why I'm just Googling it,
No, that's
So,
okay.
yeah, the gigantomachy was the battle that in Greek mythology where the fight between the giants and the sons of Gaia or Uranus and the Olympian gods who were trying to overthrow them. But there's also, I don't know, I think titanomachy was a different battle. The titanomachy,
Battle of the
10
Titans.
series of battles fought in Thessaly, consisting mostly of the Titans.
Yeah.
Or of God, older generation of gods versus the Olympians. Yeah, so that was more like the gods fighting. So, but I try to root those mythical stories in what might have really been referring to, and so many, historically savvy Christians will and theologians will point out that the notion of the giants in Genesis, causing the flood, and in Jude it talks about, and Second Peter it talks about how the angels that sinned were bound in the earth, imprisoned in the earth. Well, this is very, very similar to these titanomachies and gigantomachies, these Greek things where the giants fought, and they were imprisoned in the earth. And it even says that they were imprisoned in Tartarus. And that's very interesting because the Tartarus shows up in the New Testament.
It does.
Yes.
Under
and
Paul.
That was in 2 Peter 2, it says, if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell. And that word hell is a bad translation. It's actually Tartarus, which is the deepest depths of Hades.
Right.
And committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until judgment. If he didn't spare the ancient world but preserved Noah, how much more will he destroy, right? And so this is a reference to, like, at the time before the flood. This is that reference in 2 Peter, and Jude also references it. But the point is he says, cast them into Tartarus.
Right.
And that's exactly where the giants in Greek mythology were cast. So this is a similar, of course, in this case, it's the angels, not the giants, right?
Yeah.
But they don't have to be exactly the same. The point is the imagery is very similar. And I think that I think it's important for us to recognize those similarities, and we can have a better understanding of the real meaning. Because otherwise, Christians will read 2 Peter and come up with some other ways to describe this. Oh no, this is, I don't even know what they come up with, to be honest with you. But to me, it's pretty clear that this is talking about the angels who sinned were the ones who had sex with the women in Genesis 6. They were cast into Tartarus, committed to chains of darkness until the judgment. In other words, what they did was so violating of God's holiness, that he imprisoned them, right? And Christians will try to, explain that away by, I don't know how. But this is another problem with the word hell in our Bible. It's, unfortunately, we have this notion of hell.
Right.
Hell, it's the eternal burning fire and all this kind of stuff. And while that imagery is used in some places, the word hell in English is unfortunately translated for words that don't mean that.
Gehenna.
It's the word Hades.
Yeah.
They'll translate Hades, which Hades is not hell. Hades
Right.
is not burning fires. It's the place of the dead.
It's Sheol.
Gehenna,
It's the black
Sheol, right,
darkness.
Sheol.
Yeah.
Sometimes Gehenna is translated as hell, and Gehenna was has a history of interpretation that goes back to the Old Testament, the Valley of the Sons of Hinnom, and it was a place where people sacrificed their sons to Moloch, Molech, and God destroyed Israel before doing that. And he called that the Valley of Slaughter, and it's the Valley of Hinnom. And so that becomes a metaphor for God's judgment on Israel or whatever.
Right.
And that's still judgment, and it's still suffering. So I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is our traditional notions of hell are often imposed because of the bad English translations.
I agree. And I wouldn't endorse the Jehovah's Witness version of it, but I said I wouldn't endorse the Jehovah Witness version of it.
Right. Yeah.
but But no. I mean, Sheol goes back to the Old Testament, where it talks about the spirits of the Rephaim coming up to meet you, and like the lake of fire coming from, of course, the Book of Enoch, and then coming up across the New Testament from the Book of Enoch even into Revelation. So, I find that all of that fascinating.
Yeah, we mentioned Jude earlier, and Jude has a classic passage where it quotes from the book of First Enoch, but it doesn't just quote from Enoch. This is where he says in Jude 14, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on all who convict and to convict all the ungodly of their deeds of ungodliness," right? And it's a quote literally from the book of First Enoch, and he doesn't just quote from that though. All the content of Jude is actually referring to content from Enoch.
Right.
So there, like you said, there's a drawing from that text that we have to face and accept. You don't have to conclude that Enoch's scripture, but you do have to conclude that maybe we should grant some of this material a little bit more respect than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As Christians.
Mm-hmm.
As Christians.
Fully agree.
I mean, non-Christians
Fully
don't have
agree.
that problem. But I mean, Christians often do. It's sort of like, and look, I come from this tradition where it's a tendency to think like, well, if the Bible didn't say it, then it's not true. As if I do believe the Bible is our ultimate authority of what's true about God, but that doesn't mean there's no truth anywhere else. You know,
right?
You know,
yeah. No, I agree.
Especially if the Bible quotes from other books, I
Yeah.
got to deal with it.
I don't think I knew about the Book of Enoch till I was 30.
Yeah.
30 years old.
Well, I was over 40, so
Yeah.
I beat you on that one. I beat you on ignorance.
And
Isn't that
if
amazing?
someone would
We
have
don't
told
get
me
taught
that
this stuff.
Right?
Christ quoted Enoch,
I was over 50 when
I would have been
figured it
upset.
out.
Yeah. Right.
What did you say about Christ quoting?
Yeah, I said if somebody
Oh,
would have
yeah.
told me way back earlier that Christ actually quoted Enoch, I would have I'd call them a liar. Like no,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
What- Do you? I'm not familiar with that.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
enlighten me on that?
Yeah. Jesus actually quotes him like 8 times.
Oh wow, really?
Oh
Send
yeah.
that to me. I'm not. I don't have that down. That's interesting.
And it's kind of funny because it actually comes from one of the older denominations, and they show you the links back and forth.
Cool.
Yeah, it was in relation to how much the apocrypha is quoted across the New Testament, because everybody I won't say everybody, the evangelical movement discounts everything in the apocrypha. Oh
Yeah,
no.
It's ridiculous.
Right.
But then if you actually go through the New Testament and you reference the material, a lot of it comes from the Apocrypha. So it's fantastic. When you go back and you actually look at all the references.
Those are also books that I in my earlier Christian years did not learn to appreciate until in later years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get over this thing that only the Bible says anything true. Therefore, nothing's true in anything else.
Right. But then if you think about it, what you define, and actually we covered this in I think it was our 3rd episode, the canons, right? We actually covered the canons because the evangelicals hold on to a later canon than the earlier testaments because Jesus quoted from the Septuagint. But the Septuagint included the Apocrypha.
That's true.
So
Yeah, that's profound.
right?
Yep.
So what do you define as the canon? So yeah.
Very good point.
Yeah. To touch on another subject, I love the fact that you incorporated the Legend of Lilith in your books. That's fascinating, and you pulled in her 2 children as well, the twins. I thought that was awesome. How you had Lilith, and then the 2 twins that would entice people into the tree of life, and so the world
Yes.
tree. That was fascinating.
Lilith, actually, the word for Lilith demon does show up in the Old Testament.
Right.
It's in Isaiah, and I don't have it on my fingertips here, but if one of you guys can find that one. Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, Lilith has this whole history, and even in Judaism it does too, but it's also rooted in, I think, Mesopotamian deities and stuff. And so that's another one of the examples where I try to say, okay, I try to incorporate other ancient mythologies, but I incorporate them, like we said earlier, I incorporate them as demonic realities rather than, godly realities or whatever. So they're not myth, but they're more demonic, right? And so, yeah, so the story of Lilith, there's a few different myths surrounding her. One of them, later ones, I think, is that Lilith was Adam's first wife, I think, believe it or not, and she didn't want to do what he said, so then God created Eve and then kicked Lilith out of the garden, right?
Wow, I've never heard that.
That's one of them. But then also the Jewish legends have it that Lilith is the name of sort of like a wilderness demon that comes and kills newborn babies and stuff like that. And she had these two daughters, I think it was, and in the myth, right? So yeah, so I brought Lilith into the Chronicles of the Nephilim because I wanted to bring some of those pagan mythologies alive within all their demonic reality. Yeah. So, and also, if you go to the website, Godawa.com, go to Chronicles of the Nephilim, look at some of the novels there. I've got casts of characters, and I have little pictures of Lilith, and I describe her and stuff, and I show pictures of her daughters from the novels.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is. It really is. I love the. Are those actors that you've hired to take those pictures?
No, that's stock photography. But I had to do a lot of research to find images that I felt would represent it really well. I'm amazed at how many I found were like, that's a perfect image, So yeah.
You did well, because as I was going through the different pictures, I was like, oh, that's exactly how I think they look.
Cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Some people don't agree. That some people thought, no, I don't want to see pictures of them. I want to see them in my head. I don't want to see what you show. Someone did that with my new series, Chronicles of the Apocalypse. One of the main characters, which is now becoming one of my favorite characters, is Cassandra, the Christian. And I found this picture of a woman that I thought was pretty good, a redhead that I used on the website. And the guy told me, like, she doesn't look pretty enough to me for what I was thinking. And I thought about it. I had to agree with him. I'm like, yeah, I kind of, for some reason, she doesn't have that magical prettiness that I thought Cassandra would have. So I found a better one, and now the one I have now I think is really awesome. So, but that's just the guy in me.
There you go. Now the Azazel has had a lot of influence in your books. That's this is one where I'm going to probably rabbit trail a little bit, because I find Azazel fascinating, because you have him in the Old Testament, right? Leviticus 16. You have him in the Old Testament, and then you also have him across, like, the Book of Enoch, and then you also have him in legends, old Jewish legends as well. So, it's one of those ones that fascinates me. So please elaborate.
Yeah, well, what you're referencing is so Azazel actually shows up once in the Bible in Leviticus, and it's when God's Leviticus 16 verses 7 through 10, and it's the description of the one of the sacrifices of sin offerings. I can't remember which one. Atonement. It might have been. Yeah, I think it's the Day of Atonement, actually. So this is the one that some people may have heard about, where the high priest takes two goats, sets them before the Lord at the tent of the meeting, and Aaron casts lots over the goats. One of the lots is thrown for one goat for Azazel, and then the other one is thrown to be a sin offering for Yahweh. And then one that's Azazel, what's Azazel? Well, that goat, it doesn't describe it in the Bible. And it just says, and then that goat, they send that goat out into the wilderness as a scapegoat. They put the sins of the people. One goat for Yahweh takes the sins of the people and they sacrifice it. The other goat takes the sins and goes out into the wilderness as a symbolism of God, takes our sins and throws them into the chaos of the wilderness, never to be seen again, that kind of a thing, right? and it says it should be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. And people go, well, what's Azazel? What's that, right? And actually, the place where it's never defined in the Bible, but it is in other extra biblical literature,
Right.
such as the book of Enoch.
Right.
And there it comes out that Azazel was the name of one of the premier leaders of the fallen sons of God we were talking about, these watchers in Genesis 6. Azazel and Semyaza were the two lead angels, mostly Azazel. And Azazel was a key watcher there, right? So, but basically, I think by the biblical times, what they're meaning there is not that Azazel, and Azazel, by the way, was supposedly buried in the desert of Dudael.
Right,
No one knows
right,
where that is. But the point is he was buried in the desert.
Right.
So it's like you're sending this goat out to the desert, to Azazel, right? But I think what it means is not that, they're doing a sacrifice to this false god of Azazel, the Jews, but rather that whole story of Azazel became a symbol, and Azazel became the symbol of the chaos that is in the wilderness. The wilderness represented the chaos. It's untamed, right? But our covenant community is safe and orderly and covenanted with God, right? And so to send it out to the wilderness, to Azazel, is to send it out to chaos. So I see it as a very strong symbolism, but a reference to something that may be very much a reference to these watchers. And they called Azazel, let's see, in these other legends, Azazel was a goat demon.
Yes.
And so the pagan Canaanites believed in satyrs and goat demons, and they sacrificed to them. And so there are other references to that show up later in the text. Like, for instance, when I can't remember where, but let me see if I can find it. Israelites start sacrificing to these goat demons, and that makes God really ticked off. So he curses them. So here it goes. Let's see.
I love the way you incorporate those two, because I didn't realize that the goat demons were a thing inside the Valley of Bashan, and the way you incorporate those two through peer-reviewed studies to dig it up was just awesome. I mean,
yeah, no, absolutely. So again, this is sort of like, I want to draw from the Bible as my main, operating paradigm in Chronicles of the Nephilim and Apocalypse, but I want to draw from these other sources because it's all sort of integrated, and it's really pretty much what C.S. Lewis was doing. When C.S. Lewis wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he had pagan satyrs and centaurs in his Christian story, right? Oh, isn't that wrong? No.
Right.
His whole premise was, he said, yeah, but they're all subject to Aslan, and so they are limited within Aslan's world. So it's like he was saying, when in Aslan's world, even the pagan deities are submitted to him, that kind of a thing. So he's using these pagan images to show that God is Lord over all, even over these pagan imagery. And that's what I want to do as well in my stories, is to say that these pagan notions are just part of a distorted picture of what God has told us as well. So, this idea of goat demons and Lilith and Azazel also are referenced whenever there's a destruction. Let me see if I can find it. There's some passages that talk about the destruction of Babylon and such. And it says that, I can't find it in Jeremiah, that the goat demons are dancing on the graves of Babylon, right? The satyrs, in other words, the satyrs are dancing, and Lilith will be there as well. So in other words, they use all these pagan notions as representations of demonic reality, of demons. In other words, Babylon's going to be destroyed and the demons are going to be dancing on their graves. That's kind of what Jeremiah and Isaiah is saying when they refer to this. Really fascinating.
Now, how much of the Book of the Giants were you able to pull to use the Legend of Gilgamesh into your story? Because I loved your visualization of Gilgamesh inside of your story. It was almost like it was almost like watching the old Disney film. What was that with Mowgli and
Jungle Book.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah, Gilgamesh was another one that I've always wanted to retell the tale of Gilgamesh, but I wanted it to be accurate. So I used one of the best scholarly sources on Gilgamesh, as well as the book itself. And so I retold the tale of Gilgamesh, but I incorporated it within my biblical worldview. And there are some theories that some believe that Gilgamesh is a legendary, symbolic, mythical character, but most people believe that he's based on probably someone in history that was just, magnified, right? So who was it? Who was it? And I have a theory of what it is, and no one knows for sure, but I believe that he's incorporated in the Bible. And I'm not going to say why, because it'll spoil the twist. But so Gilgamesh Immortal, I retell the Epic of Gilgamesh based on the original Epic of Gilgamesh within its own context. But I do so in a way that it blends in and incorporates with my biblical storyline. So if you read my book, Gilgamesh Immortal, you're going to get an accurate picture of the original story, relatively accurate. But you're also going to see how it may have been incorporated within a biblical worldview. Yeah. I tried to be really true to that original story, because I didn't want to destroy it, because it's so powerful in and of itself,
Yeah, without revealing too much, I'm going to say I thought it was done brilliantly.
Thank you.
I really did. Because I'm a guy who actually has read the stories of Gilgamesh and also the Book of the Giants, and they kind of go hand in hand. They really do. But then the way that you retold them, it was perfectly in line with like both of them. So
that was my goal.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I thought it was great. And then even then, all of your books come in line with the whole conf, right? That you talk about, right? So
chaos conf is that German term that has to do with it's a word that means battle of the storm or something like that, and it basically is the notion that in ancient religions, the way that they described the authority of their god or gods being over creating their order, their cosmological order, whether it's the nation of Babylon or Israel, they use the language of chaos conf, which is the god or the gods battling the sea and the sea dragon, and the sea dragon represents chaos, and even that's the case even in the Bible. You know, God is depicted as battling the sea, and all over the Book of Psalms and stuff, and battling the sea dragon, which is called Leviathan. Now, here's what's something that's very interesting. Psalm 74. Psalm 74 is describing them crossing the Red Sea under Moses, and that's when God establishes his covenant with his people, right? That's the beginning of him establishing his covenant. And in Psalm 74:13, it says, "You divided the sea by your might. You broke the heads of sea monsters on the waters. You crushed the heads of Leviathan." That word heads is plural, you guys.
Yeah.
It's not singular. So in other words, Leviathan has multiple heads. And you gave them for the food to the creatures of the wilderness. You established the heavenly lights and the suns and fixed the boundaries of the earth. It's like describing the creation of the earth, right? But all he's describing is God creating his covenant. So in other words, it's clearly symbolic language of God saying, look, I'm going to establish my covenanted order. I'm going to create order. I'm going to push back the seas. I'm going to crush the Leviathan of chaos and establish my covenanted order, because I am the God of the universe, And so this is this symbolism of Leviathan and sea dragons is a very Babylon had it as well. Tiamat, the sea dragon, was destroyed by Marduk. Yeah. And then that's how he created the heavens and the earth. He split the sea dragon in half and he created the heavens and the earth, right? So the Hebrews use this common imagery, but they invest it with their own meaning and purpose. It's a little bit different for what they're trying to communicate, but it's symbolic. It's intentionally so. They don't believe that this stuff is literal monsters. They know it's poetic.
Absolutely. One last thing before we end everything, because I found this fascinating is that the fact that Rahab is a girl, a sword, and a beast.
Okay, well that's another element, and you gotta read my book. Like When Giants Were Upon the Earth, I explain all this. Leviathan is not a dinosaur in the Bible; it's a sea dragon of chaos. And then sometimes, what I've found is they'll refer to Leviathan as Rahab. So in other words, just like people have double names. People call them by one name, and you are Peter, but Peter was called Cephas in Greek, right? And
right.
And
The
Peter, I don't know, multiple names for the same person. That's very common in the ancient world, right?
Right.
And so I think Leviathan was sometimes called Rahab because if you look at the passages that Rahab are described, it's very much the same as Leviathan. And I don't know why. I don't know why, and I'm not even sure what that word means. So I use the words, and actually I use the word Rahab to refer to the original mother of the sea dragon of Leviathan. So I just kind of play around with that a little bit. But nevertheless, so this Rahab is this notion of the sea dragon of chaos, and it just so happens that Rahab was the name of the prostitute who let the Joshua and the Hebrew spies into Jericho.
Great character, by the way.
I don't think, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure now that that's a different Rahab. Like it's spelled a little bit slightly differently, Rahab, in Hebrew. So it's not the same exact name, but in the English translation, it looks the same. See what I'm saying? So it's technically not the same name.
Right.
So I'm dealing with the English translation, and then, so that there's no real connection between the two, and I don't make the connection. However, there's a fantastic sword from the supernatural sword forged in the mountains of Sehan, which is where Eden was, and in the book of Enoch. And this is a sword, what I call a whip sword. And so it's like a sword that's about 10 feet long, but it's flexible like a whip, but it's unbreakable metal. So it's like, imagine a whip that's a sword, right? And I call it, they nickname it Rahab because it gives a mean bite like Rahab the sea dragon, right? So, and it's serpentine. The sword is serpentine like. So they nickname it Rahab just because of the what it is, that kind of a thing. So and then that sword is a special supernatural weapon that ends up traversing the entire series, even into Chronicles of the Apocalypse.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I mean, me coming from a martial arts background, I was like, oh man, that is so cool. That is just so cool.
Now, I cheated. I did actually do some research, and I got the idea from, I think is it Filipino or I think it's Indian. It's an Indian weapon that actually does exist. Not exactly the way I have it, but they do actually have a whip sword.
Yes.
That they do things in, and that's where I got the idea from. So
yeah, which is totally awesome. I won't lie. I
can't imagine having to use that weapon though. That must be really scary.
Oh my Lord. Even just a 3-sectional staff, because I've used both, nunchuck and 3-sectional staff, and even the 3-sectional staff is incredibly hard to use because the other two parts that are, anytime you're only grabbing onto one part. So you have to pay attention to the other two parts. Yeah. And it's incredibly confusing sometimes as you're spinning it. It's like, oh shoot, I have to do this or it's going to knock me out.
Yeah.
So yeah, even just from a 3-sectional staff point of view, it can be very confusing, especially when you're first starting out on how to swing it. Yeah. So yeah, I can agree. Well, this has been awesome having you on, Brian. Just as last time, maybe even better this time.
Cool.
Yeah, had a blast. Anything else, guys?
I want to encourage you to take on sexism and keep going with sex in the Bible. Maybe 50 Shades of Grace.
How long has that been brewing, Mike?
You guys moved on to the political aspect way too fast, and I'm just like, oh, come on.
That was good, though. That was really good.
That's good.
Oh my God!
I wouldn't doubt it if there is a Christian ripoff already out there.
If not, there will be after this airs.
Yeah.
Steve?
I just took a lot in today, and I'm like, wow.
Right.
I have a lot to chew on this week.
So please check out not just Bible Over Brews, but Godawa.com.
Godawa.
That's right, Godawa.com. For some brilliant, he has free articles on there. You can find his books on there, his audiobooks on there, all of his research, his past and his future inside film and literature. So please check out Godawa.com and check us out at BibleOverBrews.com. You can find us on all the major social networks, including Facebook, Pinterest, Google+, Twitter, you name it, we're on it.
Dropbox.
Right? Have a good night.
All right, have a good one.
All right.
So long.